everybody, this is Will Tallheimer, and this is a Parallel Universe production of Will's Gold. In this episode, we'll be talking about context alignment. I'm going to get you started with 2 questions. Here we go. This is Will's Gold, number 3. And your first question is this one. Your employees attend a 4-day course on video cinematography. The following week, they will be given a paper and pencil certifying exam, which will be proctored in your organization's highly distinctive Oak Boardroom. That means they're going to have to take the test in the Oak Boardroom. Your question is this one. If you want to maximize your learner's passing rate on this test, where should you hold your 4-day course? And you have these choices. A, in the Oak Boardroom. B, in a room with video equipment. C, in a room nearby to the learner's workplace. Or D, the location of the learning does not matter much. So choose an answer. As I always tell you, it's good for your learning if you actually go out on a limb and make a choice. So choose an answer here. So here's your second question. Now maybe that first question was a little bit too vanilla for you, so I'm going to give you a second chance. Jody is a physical therapist intern at Bay State Muscle Mass and will be tested in 2 months on her PT skills, her physical therapy skills. All Bay State offices look alike, but each can select background music and air fragrance. So democratic of them. Jody knows her test will take place in the Somerville office, which plays jazz and smells like roses. She can't intern there, but she can pick an office for her internship, which will help her perform best on her final PT test. And here are your answer choices. A, maybe she'd choose Office 1, which plays rock and smells like mint. Or B, Office 2 plays jazz and smells like pepper. C, Office 3 plays blues and smells like roses. D, Office 4 plays jazz and smells like roses. Or E, the office choice does not matter much. Now, as you can see, some of these are slightly aligned or completely aligned with the Somerville office where she'll have to take her test. Choice D is completely aligned. Choice 1 is completely misaligned. Office 2 aligns with the jazz, but not the pepper. And Office 3 aligns with the roses, but not the blues. And of course, choice E says, hey, none of this matters. Which do you think is correct? Make a choice. So the question we're asking here is this one. Does the background context matter? And more specifically, do we as L&D professionals need to think about context when we're designing our learning? Should we add it in there? Is it important? If we do add it in there, how should we design it so that it's most effective for our learners? We're going to go back to the questions now, and I'll share the correct answers. Now, the correct answer to this one is, well, wait, before I tell you that, let me ask you this question. If you were designing a 4-day course on video cinematography and you wanted your learners to learn the most for a practical use of video, what would you do? Well, you'd put them in a room with video equipment, you'd let them use it, you give them hands-on experience, right? But what's the performance situation here? The performance situation is a paper and pencil test. So the video equipment is not going to help that much. The correct answer here is A, in the Oak Boardroom. Let's go on to the next question. The correct answer to this question is choice D. What you want to do always is to align the learning situation with the performance situation. Here in the Somerville office where she's taking her test, they're going to play jazz and it's going to smell like roses. And so if she's in an environment that's playing jazz and smells like roses, it's going to be more likely that she remembers what she learned from her internship when she's taking her final PT test. Let's look at the cognitive psychology of this. So when learners are learning, they are encoding information. They're taking in the learning stimuli and they're encoding it in such a way that it goes through working memory into long-term memory, and then it stays there, hopefully. Now, when they're doing that, they're not only taking in the learning messages, but they're also taking in the learning background context. So here we have the background context. Let's say I was trying to teach you that a foss was a ditch. Foss is a synonym for ditch. That would be our learning message. Okay, I do that. You're taking both of these in, you're encoding both of these, and they're connected in your long-term memory. Well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, let's take a look. So we want to know how the background stimuli is going to trigger the retrieval of the learned information. So we go back into the Oak boardroom and we have to take this paper and pencil certifying exam. And the stimuli in that room could trigger retrieval of the learned information. Now here's how it works. We have our long-term memory. With the spikes, it looks like our long-term memory has been subject to a lot of caffeine, but there it is, our long-term memory. And we've encoded the background context and the foss in the ditch, our learning message. It's in our long-term memory. When we go back into that Oak boardroom, there's stimuli in that environment that are similar to the stimuli stored in memory. And because they're similar, we're likely to trigger those. And because these two things are connected in memory, it's likely going to access this learning message as well. And then we're going to be able to retrieve that information and take any actions we might want to take based on that information. Now, I know you're looking at this and go, whoa, I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay, let me dive into this a little bit. Okay, let me dig into this by sharing with you some scientific research. And I'm going back to the very first study, Smith, Glenberg, and Bork, if you want to look it up. What they had learners do was either learn in room A or in room B, room A or B. And then they had them remember either in room A or in room B. And when you learned in room A, you remembered more if you had to remember in room A versus B and vice versa. And they did this with scuba divers as well. They had them learn either on land or 30 feet underwater. When they learned on land, they were better able to remember on land than 30 feet underwater and vice versa. When they learned 30 feet underwater, they were better able to remember 30 feet underwater than on land. But this isn't just the visual context that matters. They also had people learn listening to jazz or listening to Mozart. And these are all actual experiments. So if they learned listening to jazz, they remembered more listening to jazz than to Mozart and vice versa. They've done this with silence. People remember, people who learn where it's silent remember more when it's silent than when it's noisy and vice versa. They've done this with smells. People learning when they're smelling peppermint will remember more smelling peppermint when they're trying to remember smelling osmanthus than peppermint versus vice versa. Yeah, you say it. Now, there's one other experiment I want to share with you, and I want you to know Dr. Will Thalheimer does not recommend this, even though he's from Massachusetts, where this is completely illegal. They had people learn under the influence of cannabis versus not being stoned. And when they learned under the influence of cannabis, they were better able to remember under the influence than when they were not stoned and vice versa. And I just want you to know that this does not explain my vice versa. Okay. Now, the research stuff may not convince you, but maybe something else might. Let me share some other ideas here. Okay, so maybe my hand signals weren't all that clear. So let me share with you the actual research. Here's some of it. This was the classic study that got it all started. They had people learning in room A versus room B. When they learned and then remembered in a different context, they remembered this much. when they learned and then had to remember in the same context, the same room, they remembered this much. So you can see that's like a 50% improvement in learning results. That's a very strong finding. Now here was the study on peppermint versus osmanthus. I wish they would have picked a scent that you could pronounce more easily, but other than that, it was a great experiment. What they found was if the scent was different at the learning situation and at the remembering situation, then they did worse than if the scent was the same. The scent seemed to remind them of what they learned. Again, that's a sizable improvement in learning results. So here's the study where they had them either learn when it was quiet or when it was noisy, and then they had them remember when it was quiet or noisy. And when those were mismatched, they didn't do as well as if they were matched. So again, if it was quiet, they were better able to remember when it was quiet. Noisy, when they learned, they were better able to remember when it was noisy than when it was quiet, and vice versa. Now, let's say you don't resonate with the research or you want more proof. Well, I have some more proof for you. Let me share. Now, I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me frequently. I need to go to the ATM, and I'm walking toward the ATM up Somerville Avenue there, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot remember my PIN. I cannot remember my PIN. I hope when I get there, I can remember my PIN. And magically, I get there, I look at the keypad, and the keypad reminds me of my PIN. And then I put my PIN in. An example of how context can trigger remembering. Or I have one more example for you. Okay, so I'm in my kitchen and I'm making a tremendous pasta dish. And then I remember, I think to myself, I need to go, there's something in the living room I need. And I go and I walk across the house, right? I'm walking across the house. And I get to the living room and I can't remember what it is. So what's the first thing I do? No. I know you're going to say that I should walk back and go back to the kitchen. That's not the first. The first thing is I look around for clues. And if I can't find any clues, then I walk back to the kitchen. And that's where I encoded the intention of going to the living room to get the scissors. And so I walk back. I remember I look around for the scissors. There they are. I get the scissors. I'm ready to get the scissors, and I realized that I needed the scissors to cut the basil. And the basil is really important in this case because I learned how to cook smelling basil. And so I want to make sure that I remember everything I've learned about cooking so that I can complete this recipe, this Italian pasta recipe. Is that too far-fetched? I don't know. I try to cook up some things for you. All right. But perfect example of context alignment. Have to go back to the place where you originally encoded the idea so that you can remember it later. And then when you go back later, that environment, that remembering environment, that work performance environment is hopefully going to trigger the remembering of our learners. All right, back to the show. So I shared a few experiments with you on context, but I want to assure you there's many, many more experiments. I pulled these from a research to practice report I wrote, but there's many more studies than these. In fact, this is such an important area of research in the learning sciences that some researchers have even created their own paradigms about this. So we have, for example, Tulving's encoding specificity hypothesis, Bransford's transfer appropriate processing, Smith's context dependent memory. And I share this with you to emphasize how important, how fundamental this idea, this context alignment notion is to human functioning. Obviously, then, we need to make sure that our learning designs are aligned with what we know about context alignment. Now, how do we do that? Well, you and I, as learning professionals, already know how to do this, but let me emphasize what it is, what to focus on. Our overall goal is retrieval. This is a fancy word for remembering. We want our learners to be able to retrieve information later. So what do we have to do? We have to increase learning. We have to minimize forgetting, but we also can do this. We can create spontaneous remembering. When people enter their performance situations, the cues in that environment should trigger them to spontaneously remember what they've learned. And they can do that through this context alignment. Here's what we have to do. So how do we create this spontaneous remembering? The number one thing to do is to change the learning context to make it similar to the performance context. And we know how to do that. We provide people with hands-on practice with the equipment and tools they're going to actually have to use in their work. We give them simulations, have them act out, make decisions within a simulation, or we give them decision scenarios with the realistic context shared within those scenarios. We can do these things. Don't be surprised. I've got another question for you. Your company is building a new course to teach employees how to use the new Employee Assistance app, which will be made available on their laptops within 2 weeks. Which of the following is the most critical learning design consideration? Is it A, ensure learners take the course online while sitting at their normal desks? B, ensure the app interface used in the training will be similar to the app interface used in the finished app? C, both are equally critical? Or D, neither is critical? Or E, neither is critical? Neither, neither, you can decide. Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Make your choice. Correct answer is choice B. Make sure the app interface used in the training will be similar to the app interface used in the finished app. This is important too, but this is even more important. So we're teaching algebra in a room, in a classroom. What's more important, the room context or the algebra context? The algebra context, the foreground, what people pay attention to is going to be more important than the background information, the background context. What if we're doing leadership training? We're in a classroom, we're teaching managers how to be leaders. Is that more important, or is management context more important? Giving them case studies, giving them scenarios to deal with them, putting them in simulations, having them think and reflect upon real world management situations. Clearly, the management context is more important. So foreground is more important than the background context. The reason the researchers are so interested in the background context is they wonder why. Why would this be so important? But we need to know that the foreground context is even more important. Both are important, but foreground is even more important. So this brings me to the magic question. I called it the magic question many years ago. I'm sticking with it. But instead of just asking when we're doing learning design, what do our learners need to be able to do? We should be asking this question as well. What do learners need to be able to do? And in what situations do they need to do those things? Sometimes we have focused on the knowledge without focusing on the context. And we can see now from this research on context alignment how important context is. Now, this means that you and I have to do something extra. We have to go into the performance situation, the work performance situation. We have to figure that out. What are the cues in that environment? What are people going to be paying attention to? What can we maybe use to trigger, and then design that into our learning programs? So the magic question is the first part of that. Let's not forget the situations and the context, but then we have to dig deeper and do our training needs analysis, do our cognitive task analysis, do our situational analysis before we can create the most effective course. And why are we doing this? We're doing this to help our learners to remember. Here we have more remembering at the top, less remembering at the bottom, a learning curve, a forgetting curve. If our learners go up a learning curve during learning, but slide down the forgetting curve, we have not done our job as well as we might. To maximize remembering and minimize forgetting, we need to use things like context alignment. Also, be better to even pair context alignment with retrieval practice. When we do that, we have realistic practice, and then we can go back and we can space that practice over time, which we know is another thing. So those three things, context alignment, retrieval practice, spacing repetitions over time, if you do those three things, you're going to be minimizing forgetting. So I wrote about this in the CEO's Guide to Training, E-Learning, and Work. One chapter out of 50. It's a 2-page chapter. All the chapters in the book are very short, but then there's extensive chapter notes, which goes into the research if you're interested. So I'll share that on my Substack and on the Work Learning Research webpage, worklearning.com, if you're interested. So I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it. I want to point out one thing. The first video was on retrieval practice. The second was on the spacing effect, or spaced repetitions. And this third one is on context alignment. These three learning factors are probably the most important things we can do to support our learners in remembering, to minimize the forgetting curve. If we do those three things, we are going to create incredible advantages for our learners. We might go to the subtitle of my book, Empowering Learning for a Competitive Advantage. I really believe this. If one learning team is using the learning sciences and the other team is not, the one that's not maybe help their learners to understand, but those that are using these three learning factors, retrieval practice, spaced repetitions, and context alignment are going to be improving the learning results by maybe up to 100% or so. That's an amazing competitive advantage. So thanks for tuning in for Will's Gold, number 3. Some of the musings from my golden years. But again, just want to emphasize, really, go back, think about those three things. Try to minimize forgetting and support remembering. Just think of the possibilities. I mean, really, there's a lot to it. Thank you. See you later.